We all good? Mics up? All right. Hello, NDC London. Come on, let's hear some noise. Come on, NDC, first time. Come on. Yeah, all right. I am excited. I am thrilled. This is my first NDC. It looks amazing, and I'm sure many more amazing stuff is going to happen soon. Wow, that's my screensaver out there. No need to see that. Let's watch some slides. That's much better. I come from Belgium. It's always a bit scary to talk for a mostly English audience. It's a bit extra scary out there. But hey, if you bear with me for the next 50 minutes or so, I believe I can help you with your UI problems. Do note that this is about UI, not AI. It happened before, people being in the wrong room, no shame, it can happen. No, I'll be talking about user interfaces. But first, can I maybe get a little bit of a feel for the room here? Could you maybe raise your hand if you're currently working in web development? Oh yeah, that's cool. Can I be a bit more specific? How about front-end development? All right, cool. Do we have any designers? Always interesting. Oh, yeah, we have a few. Awesome, cool, cool. How about students? Always interesting to know students. All right, great. Well, before I get into the whole future of UI thing, let me take a little step back and talk to you about the basics of a good UI. Now, when I talk about the basics of a good UI, I always narrow that down to three main pillars. I believe that UI should be controllable, it should be accessible, and it should be stylable. Those are the foundations of a good UI, and this is true for users, but not just for users. This is also true for us as web developers, as front-end developers, as designers. And there are a lot of common UI patterns out there. Maybe let's keep that yoga morning hand action going on a little bit longer, and could you please raise your hands if you ever had to implement one of these before? Yeah, should be pretty much all of you, right? Those are our default HTML form elements, so they are the foundation of UI on the web. And look at them. Look how beautiful they are. Each and every one of those, they are controllable. They are accessible. Not each and every one of those is equally stylable, I'll give you that one, but still, they are beautiful in their own little way. Even so, sometimes they're not enough. Sometimes you need a little bit more to create your perfect UI. For example, maybe you had to create something like this before, which is a nice little tooltip popping out of a button. Now, I can't really do that with an HTML form element. Or how about this one? A nice little toast popping at the bottom of your screen, probably asking you to accept cookies or subscribe to a newsletter, in which you always press yes, because the world is built on cookies and newsletters, but still can't really do this. Or how about this one, personal favorite of mine, your own little custom video player, something styled, something beautiful. Can't really do that with just HTML. So you want to create an experience like that, you probably have to go into something I'd like to call a hunt, more specifically, a JavaScript library hunt. And while you are hunting inside of your jungle of libraries, you might be looking at this one library and thinking, is this library accessible? Does it work with assistive technology? Does it work with keyboard navigation? If you're asking that question, you're probably already asking the good questions. But you might go beyond that, looking at some other library, thinking, hey, is this library stylable? Can I fit the branding of my client inside of that UI? And last but not least, is this library controllable and expandable? Maybe I want to do something different with that library, take my own control in it. Maybe I want to expand on it, have one library that does a multiple of things, just to keep my page weight low. So yeah, finding that perfect library inside that jungle, it can get a bit frustrating. Just as it's frustrating to find the perfect AI-generated image of an anime girl looking frustrated at some UI. It's a very frustrating experience, because these libraries, they do hurt our performance. And accessibility kind of becomes an afterthought. I've seen this happen. A person created a beautiful select, looks fantastic, client's happy, boss is happy, everybody's happy. But then right before launch, he does a little bit of keyboard accessibility testing on it, and it seems that the keyboard navigation is way off. You know what happens in that story? It gets shipped anyway, because they have a deadline to catch. And I mean, we're better than that. I'm sure many of you are better than that. I think all of you are actually better than that. We don't want that. We can do better. And that's not even talking about styling. I can't count the many times I had to use important inside of my CSS just to get a UI style based on a library, because those inline styles are just so hard to get over with. It gets messy really, really fast. But I am here to tell you today that things are going to get better. And I believe that it's about time. First little introduction of myself. Hi everyone, sorry for the little dramatic intro, but now you know what's going on. My name is Brecht and I am a front-end developer, also doing a bit of DevRel work. I go by the handle on utility band on a variety of social media, not so much on the X thing anymore, more on the butterfly thing. Blue Sky is kind of my platform I go to these days. But yeah, I do a bunch of DevRel work, a bunch of front-end work, and I do that at a company called I/O, which is a full-service agency located in Belgium, Netherlands, and Scandinavia. Besides my work at I/O, I am also a Google developer expert on web UI. It's been fantastic being part of that community, being able to travel, meet developers everywhere, learning, sharing. It's been a really inspirational experience, to say the least. But I didn't become a Google developer expert because I'm a natural speaker. I'm actually not. I have been doing this for a very long time. It's because I write. I write on my own little blog, utilityband.com, where I write about a variety of things. I write a bit about UX, I write a bit about accessibility, but most of all, I write about CSS. Because CSS is the most beautiful language on the web. No? I was sure that anyone was going to agree with me on that one. But yeah, for me it is. I'm a big CSS nerd. I love CSS. It's a thing that I love writing about so much that I even do a bunch of guest writing for it on Smashing Magazine, on the CSS Tricks, and on the I/O Tech Hub, which is our company blog. Do check it out. But that's enough about me. If you want to learn about my hobbies, I'll be here all day and stuff, so feel free to hit me up, come talk to me. I have a lot of hobbies, too many actually. So yeah, feel free to join me later on. Let's get to the essence of things, shall we? And let me talk to you about Open UI. Can I maybe ask who has heard of Open UI before? I see some hands. Right. So it's about 3 years ago that I first heard of Open UI, and I was in a pub, and it was after a conference, and somebody was talking to me like, hey, it's going to revolutionize the way we think about HTML. It's going to be amazing. Everything's going to change. I had no idea what that person was going on about. I mean, we probably had a bit too much to drink as well. But to be fair, I did remember that name OpenUI, so the next day I went and looked it up. And at the top of their website, I saw a very interesting thing, their mission statement. And their mission statement was the following: OpenUI will allow web developers to style and extend built-in web UI controls. Now, for a CSS nerd as me, if you come to me and ask me, hey, do you want to style and extend built-in web UI controls? I'm like, yes, please, thank you very much. I would love to do so. Where can I sign up? One little side note, though, it's not about replacing current web UI. Cannot really do that. Cannot break something that is already there. Cannot break the web. You shouldn't do it. You cannot do it. Websites still need to work as they did 5 years ago. But we sure as hell can enhance it. Okay, so that's the mission statement. But what exactly is OpenUI? It is a W3C community group. It is an open group. I joined them, well, 3 years ago, but anyone can join this. Everyone can do this. Whether you're a front-end developer, a browser engineer, a designer, anyone can join this group. Go to openui.org. And we do research. We do research around the different parts, states, and behaviors of current UI out there, and we try to find their common ground. Then we think about how can we standardize this in HTML. So then we write explainers. Those explainers later get picked up by the HTML working group and the CSS working group, where they get turned into specs. And then stuff lands in browsers. That's pretty much a long story short. And one thing that came from OpenUI is called the popover API. Anyone heard of the popover API before? Right, you. who has implemented the popover API before? That's a lot less. That's okay. For those that haven't heard of it, well, here is it in action. It's not going to be the most fancy demo you'll see from me today, but it's a little button and you click on it and a popover opens. Wow, might not seem that spectacular, but what if I told you that there is no JavaScript going on here? There is no CSS going on here, except for some user agent styles. What you're seeing right here is just HTML. And this is how that works. When we have a button, we can add a new attribute called popover target. Inside of that popover target value, you can see a value that references an ID which can be found on the sibling div right there, called some popup in this case. It also has a popover target action set to toggle. Now this is the default, you don't have to set it, but I wanted to show you anyway, meaning clicking on a button, it will open the popover, clicking on it again will close the popover. But if you look at the sibling div right there, you see that popover attribute, and this is where the magic happens. This is telling your browser like, hey, do not show me right away. I need to be invoked by something. Now this just works. Meaning this is HTML, meaning I can style this with CSS. But there's a lot more going on. When I open a popover and I click next to it, it closes the popover. When I open a popover, press the escape key, it closes that popover as well. You get some free keyboard accessibility, free keyboard navigation out of the box. You don't even have to think about it. The next tab focus will be inside of that popover, no matter where that popover is originated in your DOM. That's pretty cool. But maybe you don't want that. Maybe you don't want that light dismissal behavior. Maybe you want to create your own action, which I would perfectly understand. There's a solution for that. Enhancing the previous example. Now I will set the popover target action show on that button, meaning this button will only show the popover. Now look at the sibling div right there. You see that my popover now has a value set to manual. This will remove that light dismissal behavior. That means, of course, that you will have to provide your own action to close that popover, for example, by simply adding a button inside of it. That's probably the most easiest version, with the popover target action hide in this case, referencing that same ID. So here is that in action. You open the manual popover. Clicking next to it does absolutely nothing anymore. Same goes for the escape key. The tab focus, of course, will still work inside of that popover. Popover target action, toggle, show, and hide are the three actions available, and popover auto and manual are currently available in every major browser. You can use this today. This is not something future yet. There's a polyfill available. If you would have to support some older versions of Firefox or etc., you can use that polyfill. It works rather well. So please do. You can use this. So you'll got that covered. So there's two types of popovers. Well, this is the future of UI, so I'm going to go one step beyond this. There's actually a third one that we have been working on, which is called popover hint. This will force hide other hints. This will be especially handy in the future when working with tooltips, because it will get added to another stack as the auto stack. Let's take a little look at that, shall we? When you open an auto popover, it opens like this, but when you open a hint popover, it gets added to another stack and opens separately. Now, another hint will close the previous hint, but not the popover auto. Now, what happens when I open a new auto popover? It will remove everything on the stack. But inside of that popover, I can click on it again, and then I will have another stack inside of that auto. You can really keep building on this. You can really create some very complex popover systems, because now you have two stacks to play around with. This is all very new, and this will be available in Chrome version 139, which is the version coming out today, tomorrow, like very, very soon. If you want to style the open state of your popover, you can do so by the popover open pseudo class inside of your CSS. Maybe you want to add a little animation, a little transition. Maybe you want to do something specific for an open style. You can do this. You can target this. And if that's not enough, well, we also have a whole bunch of JavaScript instances and events, because maybe you want to use that popover for something else. Maybe you want to show a popover as an alert when you add something to a basket of a web shop. Just one example, something that will perfectly, well, that's perfect use case for a popover. So you could do this as well. One thing, though, about this popover that I think is a really big win is that it gets added to the top layer. Has anyone heard of the top layer before? A few people. It's a quite new concept. So imagine the following. Imagine you have a drawing. That drawing is your DOM. Now, on top of that DOM, you're going to add a transparent sheet of paper, and you're going to draw that popover on it. That transparent sheet of paper is the top layer. Let me give another analogy. Think about Photoshop or Figma layers, where one layer is your DOM. And from the moment you open a popover, you take that out of that bottom layer and place it in a layer that is on top of that. That's another way to look at it. But this makes perfect sense, because popovers should always be on top. No more z-index 9999. You do not have to do this anymore, right? Finished. That is very handy to know. It is outside of your document flow. It is as a sibling of your HTML element that is on top. Each element also gets a pseudo backdrop element that you can style. Each element in the top layer gets that. Now, some might be wondering what happens if 2 items enter the top layer. Well, the last item added will be the item on top. That's a general rule of thumb there. But here, let's take a look at it, how this happens in my DevTools. When I click on it, like that top layer gets created instantly, and then I can press a reveal badge, and I can see this backdrop pseudo element inside where that popover originated. When I close it, that top layer also gets destroyed right away. So it just gets created, shows the popover, gets destroyed right away. That's just how that goes. But if you're thinking about animating things that just get created right away and get removed right away, it starts to get a bit tricky. I think a lot of people working with React knows about this behavior when working with your DOM. It gets tricky. But there's a way to solve this. Luckily, finally. This is a whole chunk of code. I'll break it down for you in a second. But there's something new called at starting style and transition behavior that we can use to animate top layers, for example. So let's break it down and let me start talking about transition behavior. Now, by default, that popover is not displayed. Look at this code. So first we have opacity 0 and transform y minus 30 pixels. That's kind of what we're going to use as animation. It's going to fade in and move a little bit on top. That's the only thing that I'm going to do here. Then I have the properties that I'm going to transition, being the opacity detransform. But you also see 2 things that you might not always see there: overlay and display. Now you cannot transition display. That's not a thing you can do in CSS. Well, you actually can now. By adding transition behavior, allow discrete, that will allow you to animate discrete properties, such as the display property or the overlay, which is needed for that top layer. Let's take a look at this already. So it still gets entered really fast, but you see it already fading out. Okay, that's interesting. I get this, because what happens now, this top layer just gets created. He's like, oh, what am I doing here, guys? I have no idea where to go from. Where did I came from? Suddenly I exist. So it doesn't know where to transition from. And that is where at starting style comes in. Because then we tell the browser, right before or right when this thing has entered our top layer, the opacity of that thing is 0. And the translate is 30 pixels. Now you might be thinking, like, first you set minus 30 pixels and now you set a positive 30 pixels. Well, that's the beauty of it. This gives me the ability to open a different entry state and a different close state. So this example would give me an animation like this. It opens from the bottom, it leaves from the top. Okay, that's probably enough simple popovers. Let me show you another demo I created with popovers. How about this one? Popover rocket ship. Yeah. I mean, but you really can have a bit of fun with that. You can ignore it, you can play around, oh, interrupt these animations, you know. You can really make a lot of fun stuff with it. And do remember this, because the web is supposed to be fun. Never forget to have fun. It's really important. So transition behavior is available in every major browser, and add starting style is as well. Small caveat for Firefox though, it only accepts, it doesn't accept the display non-property for it yet. It will, but not yet. Still, you can perfectly use this as a progressive enhancement. Okay, it might just go into your top layer very fast in Firefox, but yeah, why not? I mean, it's perfectly doable. Another great example for a top layer, for a popover, would be the following, which is a cool little tooltip. It's a perfect use case. So how can you create something like that? I kind of explained to you the whole top layer ID. It gets removed out of that DOM, it's in that top layer, how I'm going to position something in this new layer based on something that's inside of my DOM. I cannot reach this. So there is something called in CSS now, the CSS anchor positioning, previously known as the CSS anchoring API. So this won't work. You cannot just add a little wrapper around your button and your popover, set that wrapper to position relative, and then absolute position your popover, which would have probably been the first thing you tried to do. It's the first thing that I tried to do, for sure. Doesn't work. So then I was learning a bit about that anchor positioning, and then I found the following. First, I created a popover, pretty much the same thing that you've seen before, targeting, toggle tip. It has a role note in this time, and it's a popover. And then I used CSS anchoring. So my button is going to have a new property called anchor name, and this is set to toggle tip. Now this is a name of my own choosing. This can be any name you want. Just mind the 2 dashes. Those you have to add. So you have to add the 2 dashes, but invent every other name you want to. So my popover itself is going to have position anchor set to that same name. Now these two are linked. They have the same name. Now with the anchor function, I can position my popover based on the anchor, which is my button's top. So the bottom goes to the top and the left goes into the center. And if you would do this little snippet, you can already perfectly hang your popover to a little button. But there's a problem here. This is what happens when I add 2 of those. So it actually makes sense, because both of these buttons have the same name. It's going to check out the last one in my DOM, and it's just going to position all of them there. So not handy, that CSS anchoring API. Well, there is a way to do this, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't show you. We can actually handle multiple toggle tips. And there were a lot of ideas out there. They were thinking about an anchor attribute. Some people were thinking about a CSS solution. And there will be an easier solution than the one that I'm going to show you today. But it hasn't been invented yet. But it will. This is how I would handle this right now. I would add an inline style in my button, declaring a variable containing a name. For example, toggle tip 1. I'm using just the same thing as the IDs just to make it simple, right? Think of this as you would do this in a loop in JavaScript or something like that. Then my div, my popover, also has a variable called popanchor, also referencing that same name. And I'm doing the same for that bottom toggle tip as well, except this time it's called toggle tip 2. That's the difference here. Then inside of my CSS, I am going to read that variable inside of my anchor name. And I will do the same thing for my popover. Now these names are unique. It's reading a unique name every time passed through by that inline style. Meaning this way you have created the perfect multiple toggle tip system with just HTML and CSS. That saves you a library out there. But is it enough, really? I saw this, I created this, and I was like, maybe I can take this one step further. And I was thinking about the following, like in normal use cases, we want to try something with fallbacks, right? For example, imagine that when this page was a lot larger and I'm scrolling it, you kind of want the thing to flip to the bottom. That's just good UX. That's the thing that you want. So how to handle that? Because this can be better, right? This should be better. So there's something inside of that anchor positioning, which is called position try fallbacks. Still using that same anchor name, still using that same position anchor, but now I'm setting a new property called position try fallbacks, which is going to read two names. Once again, my own choosing. By the way, this is the hard way that I'm showing you first. If you get this, you'll get the easy way a lot better. So you add top line and bottom line, names of my own choosing. But on the right-hand side, you see that I'm declaring these things in my CSS, saying, hey, position try top line. Based on the first thing here, it's going to try to place the bottom to my anchor's top. If that doesn't work, it's going to go to bottom line, trying to place the top to my anchor's bottom. It's kind of like a try and catch, except in CSS it's try, 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 try. That's kind of how that works. But if you would create something like this, then you will finally have created the perfect multiple toggle system that flips the thing around any way you want it. You can scroll it, you can click it. It's going to be absolutely close, right? I don't know if everyone in the back can see it, but my little arrow thingy is not pointing in the right direction when it's at the bottom. So, okay, I'm not a quitter. I can fix it. So how did I fix this? I'm sorry. I don't know. I can't give you the answer because there is no real fix for this yet. However, they are working with ideas on state queries in CSS or a tethered pseudo element in the CSS working group. I saw a lot of ideas coming there, but there is no real beautiful solution for getting my arrow in the right position right now. But that doesn't mean it's completely useless. Remember when I told you, I showed you the hard way? Well, those position try fallbacks actually also have a few keywords built in, and except if you're creating your own names, you could actually use those keywords. For example, flip block, flip inline, and flip start. Flip block is a vertical manner for our writing mode, inline is horizontal, and start is for our writing mode to the left. So if I would have changed something like this and I set my position trybacks to first flip inline, horizontal, then flip block, or otherwise diagonal, combining the two, pretty clever out there, then I can already create a little demo such as this. Okay, I kind of cheated and removed the arrow here, but still, that's pretty cool, right? This is still just CSS. Now, if that's not enough anchoring for you, and I'm not going to go everything on anchoring today because that's a whole new talk on itself, but there's also an alternative grid syntax for it. Instead of just going in-depth on this one, I'd like to show you a little demo created by Una Kravitz called anchortool.com, so do check that out. And here you can see the other alternative syntax. So it places a 3x3 column around your anchor, and then it gets positioned based on an inset area of that 3x3 grid. For example, inset area left, left span all, bottom span all. That way you can position your popover as well. It's also a very great approach. There is a lot more on anchoring, I can tell you that. But I mean, I could talk about this for about another hour, which I don't have the time to. But anchoring is currently only available in Chrome and Edge, so I'm sorry, it's not really full browser yet. Many updates are actually still coming in Chrome Canary, but there is also a polyfill available, and it works pretty well. You can use this to support browsers that don't support anchoring. Do note that if you go really crazy with the position fallbacks, it might have a hard time. So if you keep it simple, it works. If you make it hard, it probably won't. But there's one last thing that I want to talk to you about popovers before I move to something else. And it is that a popover, and please remember this when you leave this room, a popover is not a dialogue. Remember this very well. If you want a dialogue, use a dialogue element. It exists, it's handy. A popover is not that, because a dialogue has the role dialogue attached to it. If a screen reader user sees a dialogue, it knows that it is a dialogue. A popover is meant to be used as an empty shell. You can add your own role to it. Now, don't see this as a weakness. Don't be mistaken. This is actually a superpower, because it can be an alert, it can be a tooltip, it can be anything you want, but you will have to provide it for other users. If you want more information on that, do check out hidde.blog. He's also part of the OpenUI community group. He writes a lot about accessibility stuff and also on that matter, so do check it out. Very good content in there for sure. But we get it. We understand it. Because it's handy, right? You just have some HTML and a popover opens. With a dialog element, you have to use JavaScript with show modal, and I don't know, it doesn't always work that well. So Keith Circle, who's from the UK, by the way, came with an awesome idea. How about invoker buttons? Wouldn't that be a cool thing? Like we have something more generalized, something called invoker buttons that would open a dialog as well. Fast forward a year later, I can talk to you about some experimental features. So do note what I'm showing you now is experimental, and to check out those demos, which are in my show notes you'll get afterwards, you'll have to use Chrome Canary. Go to Chrome Flags and enable the experimental web platform features. That's the only way you will be able to see those demos for now. Let me talk to you about invoker commands right now, because this is very exciting stuff. But maybe this is already starting to sound a bit familiar for you. Imagine you have a button, and inside of that button we had a new attribute called command 4. The value of that command 4 attribute references an ID, which you can find on the sibling dialog element right there. So the command attribute next to that button is set to show modal, meaning clicking on it, it will show the modal. Now inside of my dialog element, I have another button which references that same dialog but has the command close in it. With this little HTML in Chrome Canary, you are perfectly able to create your own little dialog element. You don't have to do anything else than this. But that's not all. There's a lot more for invokers going on. Let me show you a little demo created by Luke Warlow, which really fastly shows the capabilities of this new feature. Here he's using invokers to open a date picker from a distance. How about a popover? You can use it for that as well. How about maybe a details element? That would be pretty cool, right? A select? Yeah, sure. But how about some own video controls? This is where things are getting interesting. If you were wondering for a video, well, you just reference that video with an ID, my video, and you set the command to play. If you set the command to play, it will play that video. It looks for play, pause, mute, everything you want. So with that little snippet, I was able to create my own little video player. Once again, just using HTML and a bit of styling. Pretty fun stuff. But let's not stop there. There's even more. Imagine the following scenario. Here I have an input type number in the middle, and it's got the ID num. I'm going to reference that with two buttons. One on the top is going to have the command step down. The one on the bottom will have the command step up. Taking into account the steps, minimum and maximum that's on that input, it's going to give me the ability to create my own little stepper. If you've made a lot of web shops like I did, that's a handy thing to throw a library out for. So yeah, just works with HTML. Let's go even further. How about the data list? You could use an invoker to reference a data list. Do note that you'll have to reference the ID of the data list and not the ID of the input there. Small caveat here. But this is with the command show picker, which also works for the date pickers, for example, those time pickers. So show picker is that command in general, also for selects. So yeah, perfectly able to target a data list like that and create your own little thing. I think I was a bit hungry when I was creating that demo. I'm not sure. So much exciting stuff. There is a polyfill available once again, so you can actually start using this a little, because we are focusing mostly on dialog elements for the moment, because we intend to ship that first. Because there's still some concerns for video and security, so we still have to figure some things out. But we'll be going for dialogues. Invoker commands currently only available in Chrome Canary, and they are to be updated in technology preview of Safari and Firefox nightly, because they are in there, but they still have an old spec in there, so will be updated. In the future, we are also planning on working on hover and focus-based actions. And this is what your future tooltip might look like, because then we would call it an interest target. There was a lot of naming issues with that. One, how we're going to call something that triggers on hover and on focus. Interest. So interest target means hovering or focusing it will open it. And this is where your popover hint will come in very handy. Little future idea that you will see out there. Right. Popovers, invokers. I think we're pretty much done with popping things now. Let me talk to you about something else that came from OpenUI, which is called exclusive accordions. Now, maybe you wanted to create something like this, which is an accordion. Pretty sweet. Well, you only need some HTML for this right now, right? We already had something in place called the details element. So we figured if we would add the name attribute as an option to a details element, giving it the same name would make those things work together as a group. And this is where I think things get interesting. This is what I think is smart. Because we already know this behavior, right? From input type radios, you also give it the same name to make a little group. So with this, in your HTML, if you give a details element the same name, you will have created your own accordion. And this is already available in every browser. Not everybody knows this, but you can do that today. But there's more. Animating details elements have been a hard thing to do. And there is a solution coming for that as well. And I want to show you, because it is actually quite new. So imagine the following. The reason why we couldn't really animate it was because there was no real wrapper around your content. So now we are making a pseudo element available named the details content. This is like an invisible wrapper around your content. And you could animate that. For example, you could set the height 0 and then set the height auto when it is open. And then you could use that allow discrete, once again, as you see here in my transition. And you can perfectly target content visibility, which is also a discrete property. Here, everything is coming together very well. Now, some of you might be thinking, you are animating a height 0 to a height auto. This is not how CSS works. This has never worked. What are you going on about? Well, little detour, but you might want to add this new snippet inside of your CSS reset. With the interpolate size allow keywords, you are now able to animate from and to keywords. For example, from 0 to auto. Do note that for the last parts, details content and interpolate size are currently only available in Chrome and Edge, but they are coming to other browsers. Which brings me to the customizable select element. And this is where I'm very excited for. This is like the thing that I'm so passionate about. So I kind of showed you the accordion thing, and it's about reusing something that we already know, right? We use that name element. And this is where that story comes in handy a lot. But this one is still very experimental. So maybe you wanted to create something simple as this, which is your beautiful little styled select. But I'm sorry, you can't, because the select is one of those form elements, which is controllable, accessible, but not really stylable. So cannot really do that until soon, maybe. So we have a select element. What if you could opt in with CSS? For example, set the select element and the picker of the select to an appearance base select. If you would do this with CSS, you would certainly opt in about a lot of possibilities here. And then you would have a select that is controllable, accessible, and stylable. If you do this in Canary right now, you see the following. You see a bit of a different styled select, but it has a bunch of things that you can target in your CSS. You see the pseudo element for the picker icon. You see a check mark that is there in front. You also see the picker select. Yes, you can target this with CSS then, and you can style this, which is your little drop box there. You can also style the checked option. But this is not all we did. somebody, I kind of forgot who, but came up with a very clever idea. What if we would allow people to add a button inside of a select? Because guess what? A button inside of a select gets completely ignored by browsers these days. That's where things get very interesting. So you could create a button inside of your select, add a new element called selected content, which gets completely ignored by current browsers, which is interesting for progressive enhancement, and then you add your options like that. Remember this code well. We're going to build on that. So I'm going to set the picker select, and I can give it a whole bunch of styles. After that, I've set the appearance to base select, just some border, a bit of a color, just a bit of fun with it, something very simple. But let's move on. Let me show you the whole thing. So I have a select, appearance set to base select. I have the picker icon, which in my example, I styled a little bit. You have an open state that you can style. You also have your select button, because now you have a button inside of our select, and I can play around with that as well. The selected content, I can give the selected content another font weight, for example. Then on the right-hand side, you see my picker select, setting the appearance to base select. A border of 2 pixels solid hot pink, because that's a cool color. And then the options, you can play around with. I did remove the check mark. I don't really like it, but I mean, it's there as a good default. But yeah, with just a bit of CSS, I was able to create my own little select like this, which is a beautiful, cute select. But the best part is this is still accessible. Keyboard navigation still works. This is out of the box. This is just HTML and CSS. You can really create your own style to it. But you can go further than that. Did you know that that selected content doesn't actually have to be inside of your select? You can take that selected content outside of your select and reference it with the selected content element attribute on your select. So that way you have your selected content outside of your select, and that will show what is currently selected. Even more, you could visually hide some text. Please only do it visually, so screen reader users still hear it. And you can show it in your selection. This is a little demo I created based on that. So here I'm hiding the text inside of my option, but I am showing it inside of my selected content element. Now there's one more thing I'd like to address about this, and that's a bit of a danger zone. Because I was thinking, this is so cool. Let me put an input inside of my select, an input type search, write about 50 lines of JavaScript, which I did, and I was able to create something like this. 50 lines of JavaScript, just HTML, CSS, JavaScript is only handling the search. It looks so amazing, it is so fantastic, but please don't do it. I am terribly sorry. Please don't do it. Because guess what? An input inside of a select does get rendered in current browsers. So you use your backwards compatibility completely, and also think about accessibility, because, I mean, I'm not saying some genius might not be able to make this accessible, but it's going to be a very hard thing to make accessible. So please mind that. Please don't do this. But still, creating these kinds of demos are important, because OpenUI has actually started research for a native combo box inside of HTML. So let's be a bit more patient, and we'll probably find a better solution for this. Now, this doesn't mean that we cannot already have a whole bunch of creative possibilities. For example, this is a little select that you see in a current browser. It kind of selects, between health and mana and stamina. I like a bit of RPG games as well. But if you would look at this inside of Chrome Canary, it would look like something like this, which is a beautiful little potion selector. It just makes you happy, this kind of UI. But still, once again, it's still accessible. Keyboard navigation just works. Or how about this one? Just working with position sticky, you click on the item and it drags the selected option right to the middle, or even expands it in the same way. Once again, not using libraries, just some basic styling. And then the last one, I did use a little bit of JavaScript, but very little. And it's also working with state queries, which is something new in CSS coming in Chrome. The next one as well, I think. Big fan of the Monster Hunter games as well. And here you can actually have a select that you open up. You can use your arrows, select the item, enter it, and it gets perfectly shown. You can even, if you want to open this up, and how about using the arrows, which currently uses JavaScript, but there's a way to remove that as well later on. And you can even use dragging, hence the JavaScript as well. But it will select the option that you're currently on. This is currently only available in Chrome Canary, of course, but I have some news. Because a few days ago, I read this. There is an intent to ship the customizable select to Chrome stable. So we live in very excited times, especially for me nerding out on this for quite some time already. So it's going to be, I'm really rooting for this one. It is a work in progress, and even though I think we have a release candidate, do note that some of the naming might still change a little bit. Do take that into account. But you can help. You can get involved with OpenUI. Just go to openui.org, join our Discord, go on our GitHub, make demos, break stuff. Please do. Please break stuff. That's very important. If you break stuff, then we're able to find bugs and we can solve them before things enter a release state. Because the future of UI, well, it's pretty controllable, right? I hope I've shown you that, because we're using HTML, which is the backbone of our web development. It's something we know, it's something we cherish, it's something we need. The future of UI is accessible. Sure, you might have to add your own role to a popover, but think about all the stuff you get for free, all that free keyboard accessibility. So much fun to have, that light dismiss behavior, the tab focus. Really cool stuff. But as a CSS nerd, as me, well, the future of UI is stylable, giving me finally a chance to dig in deep with CSS and really create some experiences that everyone can enjoy and just put a smile on people's face. The future of UI is open. And with these last words, I do hope you enjoyed this first breakout session of NDC London. Have a very lovely day, and thank you.